With 10 weeks until the Iowa caucus, former President Donald Trump currently leads the GOP field by a huge margin. And amidst all of this, a New York Times poll shows Trump now has a big lead over Biden in almost every battleground state. We spoke with Mike Leon, host of the podcast Can We Please Talk, for his insights on this and more. Mike, welcome to our show. Thanks so much for coming on. To begin with, Trump has apparently gained a big lead against Biden in the polls. What do you think are some of the key factors here?
Hey, Stefania, thank you so much for having me on the program. You know, there's so much with respect to this because we're starting to see two wars playing out right now that the Biden administration has to account for with what's happening in the Middle East and what's happening in Ukraine. A new Speaker of the House right now that obviously President Trump likes and has backed, right? And so I think there are a lot of issues that are playing out that are leading to this in terms of the polls. You know, we've had a few Republican strategists on our program over at Can We Please Talk, and all of them have said similar things with respect to the messaging aspect part of this, right? Former President Trump is out there saying, and he just said it here at an event in Florida in Kissimmee, that, hey, there was no wars under my administration. We didn't have anything of this nature. Now, obviously, pandemic outside of it, but other than that, we didn't have any foreign conflicts. And that is true, fortunately for him. And so he's running against that right now. President Biden has so many things that are popping up foreign policy wise that are starting to come back home to roost for him, unfortunately.
And in terms of Trump's legal woes, he's right in the thick of it right now. How do you think the media's coverage could be influencing public opinion here?
Well, you know, that's a great question because it's some of the things that we've dissected on the show. We've had so many former DOJ officials, so many former prosecutors and defense attorneys kind of talking about the legalities of this and where this will net out. I saw former Governor Asa Hutchinson say something at that same event about he thinks that the former president, before you even start voting in the Florida primary, could already be found guilty of some of these charges. So the question now becomes, as these polls continue to come out from a national perspective and as we get closer to Iowa in January, the question will be, are voters going to be swayed by seeing the former president in court? That's one. Two, actually being found guilty by a jury of his peers of some of these crimes. Now, so far, according to the polling in the Republican primary, if you look at Morning Consult or any other polling agency, all of them have former President Trump up by at least, 35, 40 percentage points. So it hasn't really swayed Republican primary voters. On the national level, that New York Times poll is really alarming. And even as I'm watching CNN in the background here, you can tell that there's a little bit of worry about how that national poll is translating to independents and moderates across the Democratic base, because that is going to be the big key right now. Former President Trump, the charges, sometimes it seems to folks, are a little bit politicized, especially the New York one, but it hasn't really translated into this losing support. Will it translate once an actual charge, he's found guilty of something like that? We're going to wait and find out. But so far, it's been working in his favor.
Right. And you mentioned the primaries. We're still in that process. And recently, in the headlines, we've seen the conflict between DeSantis and Trump having their turf war. What kind of implications could that have on the Republican Party and on the election, do you think?
Well, I go back to this Morning Consult poll that recently happened back on October 29th, where almost 4,000 registered Republicans, and the former president is up 61 to 13, 48 percentage points on former Governor DeSantis. And I've said this before on other outlets and even with our show, that Governor DeSantis's platform right now is just not translating nationally. And I think it's because while he's trying to appease some of the base that former President Trump has, he's not doing it the correct way. He's fighting all of these different issues with respect to woke ideology and some of these other things that people in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, the first three primaries, typically don't care about. They want to learn more about the economic woes that they're having right now, right? Everybody talks about these same food on the table and making sure my kids are learning the right things, right? Learning how to think, not what to think, like all these different phrases. And the governor's not focusing on that. I've mentioned this before here in Florida, where I live in Miami. The governor has increased teacher pay, where teacher pay is really competitive in the state, but it's something that he doesn't mention from a messaging standpoint. And I think former President Trump right now is resting on the stuff that he did during his administration, which is no new wars, right? We're not fighting any conflicts. And so he's using that message against President Biden. And against Ron DeSantis, he's up by so much because DeSantis is not cutting to the core of some of these issues that voters are really facing right now. And I think DeSantis really needs to pivot his messaging more towards the everyday issues that Americans are fighting, not the culture war stuff that he's fought here in Florida.
Thank you so much, Mike Leon, host of the podcast, Can We Please Talk?
Thank you so much, Stefania.